Welcome to our presentation on Color Check. Color Check provides a variety of test targets that can be used in the process control scenario. For example, if you've ever wondered where you were at in relationship to your standard print condition, these tests can provide data to give you an answer. I am currently displaying a document that describes everything about Color Check. It's a reference guide that you are able to download in our website. In Onyx website, onyxgfx.com, once you log into your MyOnyx account, under the MyOnyx tab, you will find documentation. It is here that the Color Check reference guide can be found. All of the documentation under MyOnyx can be downloaded and saved for review later. Let's begin and take a look at the documentation. On page 5 of our Onyx Color Check reference guide, we will see some general information discussing process control and color check. This information is for reference for you to determine what are some things to consider in your own shop environment. Since within Color Check we can establish various test target types, it is important then that we make sure our environment and our printer conditions are all in a proper order. The beginning of this document will discuss maintenance of equipment, maintaining a stable environment, proper profiling and calibration of printers, your quality control of media and inks, and going through these certain standards, we can develop our very own workflow for our process control. Once we've established a good environment and printer condition, we can then generate the different types of test targets and come up with our standards. If the Color Check verification fails, then we can go through and evaluate our printing process or our environment and determine where might the failure have come from. The next pages of our documentation will talk about the quick and easy method for establishing and setting up our Color Check test targets. I am going to go to page 17 and reference the type of test targets we can generate. The very first type we can create is a baseline. In a baseline environment, we are adding patches or colors that we want to evaluate. Since this is a baseline, the very first time we print this chart and measure with our spectrophotometer, the information will be measured as 0 or a baseline. Depending on our verification timeline, let's say we check in 2 weeks, we print this baseline chart again, and now we can see where are we from 0. Another test target style we have is some G7 master environment controls. We can set up our basic G7 standard test targets based on grayscale or targeted specific color space, or even our standard simulation environments, which will include FOGRA and other ISO standards. We also have a print verification environment swatch chart that we can print, which will evaluate the known values inside our print gamut of our print mode. In the named color evaluation test target, swatches are being printed from our Pantone library of colors. And then lastly, we have our custom image environment. Custom image swatches allow for images provided by third-party color validation or verification packages to be easily printed under specific quick-set conditions. Therefore, we can print and evaluate within our current condition based on our quick-set controls. So let's take a look at Color Check within the software, and I will return to this documentation a little bit later. In our Thrive RIP queue, we can access Color Check at the top Applications bar. Here we can see 5 standard test target types that are created automatically within the software. You could start working with these, or you can create your own. To create your own, we're going to simply click on the New button The swatch name could be in reference to the type of color check environment we are going to use. In this example, I'll start out with a baseline example. I'll give this a name, my company name, Baseline. I can pick which quickset I would like to use. In this case, I'm going to go with my default quickset. And I can also set my verification expiration. The verification expiration can be indicated in hours, days, weeks, or months. When we consider what our verification expiration might be, we may decide to start out as a 1-week test. So once a week we run a test target and we see where our conditions are. If after 1 week our data points are still good, perhaps we change this to 2 weeks and run the test target again. If after 2 weeks our data is good, perhaps we switch to 3, and let's say at that point we discover we have bad data points. At that point then we might decide to split our difference and go within a time frame of 2.5 weeks, or possibly something like 17 days. When determining this amount of time, we want to find the right time where things start to drift or change in our process control or in our environment settings. By starting out 1 week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks, we slowly, gradually migrate up until we find what is our timeline. It is important to note that this should be a consistent time, meaning it's not 1 week and then 3 weeks and then 2 days. If we've got a very volatile environment, our process control schedules will be very hard to track. In the Options button, we can choose what our verification measurements will be based on, whether this will be absolute measurements or if it's going to use the media-based substrate correction. When media-based substrate correction is selected, the expected values are adjusted based on the measured media color. Below, we are going to make our selections of color types to be added within this baseline test target. I'm going to click on the Add button. I start out with a value where I can adjust my own dot percents in here. So let's say I type in 50% CMY. By typing in my own recipes manually, I could add to my library of colors that I want to debate for this baseline, referencing the information I want to type in. Otherwise, if I reselect my named pull-down window choice, I will get a listing of all of the Pantone colors, and these are the Pantone color library that is within my system. From here, I can select colors with the Control button. Otherwise, I'm able to select my colors by shifting a series and selecting with a range. So we can shift or control click to singly select our files. Once I've added in the colors that I want to reference in this baseline, I'm going to click on the Test tab and add all of those colors to that type of target. At the top of our menu, we're going to select the type of test or the evaluation that we're going to be considering for this baseline test. At this point, I'd like to go back and reference the documentation. Back in our documentation, the Color Check Reference Guide, on page 27, we'll start to see the list of definitions that are going to describe that test threshold that we want to evaluate to. So as you can see, we've got a mean delta E, a maximum delta E. We've also got some other conditions for delta H's, delta C, delta L. And this information is described, and we can decide which type of test do we want to evaluate based on these types of definitions. When I think of my baselines, I think about I don't want to exceed a certain delta E number. So I'm going to set my test target to a maximum delta E. I then can put in the value of what that maximum delta E or threshold should be. So let's say I don't want to exceed a delta E of 2. The precision is just the decimal placement. So if I want it to be very critical, maybe I want to say something like 2.2 or 2.1, I can reference that with multiple decimal points as well. At this point, I am establishing a baseline test with specific Pantone colors or process build colors that I've created and added to this test grouping of colors. I'm evaluating this, saying I don't want to exceed a maximum of a delta E of 2. Since this is my baseline, when I print this for the first time and measure, my data at that moment is 0. When I check in 1 week's time or 2 weeks' time, whenever my verification's set to be, I'll print and measure and see where am I. If my values are relatively low, 0.4 delta E, 0.2 delta E, I know I'm still within my parameters. I'm still printing in a good condition. If I start to exceed this delta E of 2, then I know I need to do something in my process control, in my workflow, in my environment, and check some conditions out to see why are my colors drifting in this case. It could be many different factors, but at least that gets me a telltale of where I want to be as far as my standards, and I am changing in my colors. So at this point, I'm going to click OK and set my condition in my environment. Now I've established a color check environment as a baseline. Before I print this baseline test target and measure to determine my 0, my starting point, I really need to make sure that everything in my process control, everything in my workflow is in top-notch condition. These items might consist of temperature and humidity, the proper media I want to use, ink set, printer condition, run through a cleaning cycle. My nozzles are printing well on my charts as I do my test targets. My printer heads are aligned properly. My print condition is established to be in a good condition. At this point, I can take this target and print this. When I print this target, and the print has been completed, my chart, my test target, stays up in the Jobs Ready to Print queue with the status of waiting to measure. So I simply double-click the file in order to open it up to do my measurements with my spectrophotometer. I would click on Measure, measure my data, and upon measuring this, I would see a report that's going to be generated that's going to give me the status of this test target. Remember that this is my first baseline example. First time printing is going to generate 0 data, or my benchmark by which I want to compare to in my timeline. Here is my example of my baseline report. As I start out, for the very first time, you will notice all of the patches are at a delta E of 0. This is the first time I'm printing my baseline, so I am establishing 0. As my baseline expiration date approaches, I can print again and measure, and from that timeline, whether it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks time, I can now see where my values are. In this list, I'm able to click at the delta E arrows and sort from lowest to highest. Because I set my threshold to be a maximum delta E of 2, I'm under that amount because my highest value is 1.4. However, 1.4 is getting close to 2, so at this point I might want to go through and check my process control steps, my workflow, and establish where is it that things are changing. The areas that I might want to check could start out simple in my process control workflow and start out with temperature or humidity, media type, ink set, printer condition, nozzle check, cleaning cycles, or possibly I need to perform a recalibration. Let's return back to the RIP and explore some other color check test targets. Let's create another new test target, and in this case, let's take a look at the environment for the G7 Process Control Master. One important point I want to raise here is the options down below. The input profiles in your QuickSet are consistent with this selection. What that's referring to is the only display data sets compatible with my QuickSet. Right now I'm selecting my default QuickSet, and if I explore the pull-down window, you will see I have 5 options here. However, if I reference a QuickSet specific to G7, I will see more options available for test target types in G7. When I select a QuickSet that is establishing color management parameters for G7, such as Grackle and Adobe 1998, I now click on my pull-down window and I get much more test target choices relative to G7. So this is a critical point to raise. If you want to work with the G7 standards, you really need a QuickSet established with a G7 default parameters. I'll give this the appropriate name. And in my example, to show you where we go to set that QuickSet, I'm going to go up to Configure Printer. In my QuickSet tab, I created a new QuickSet. In this case, I'll edit. And I selected from the preset pull-down menu, I changed from all ICC profiles on, I changed this to recommended G7 profiles. When I select the Change Profiles button, I can now see it's the Grackle standard as well as the Adobe 1998 standard. And it's those choices in the G7 environment that will give me the full suite of test targets. I'll return to Color Check. So again, my settings that I have is to generate a report only, no verification. If you turn that on, that's what you'll get. I can establish when my verification is going to expire, and again, I might say 2 weeks. And the type of test target that I want to select just is going to depend on the type of test target you're trying to establish and work for G7 standards. Another test target type that I might want to create could be based on standard simulation. Standard simulation is going to reference different data types that I can print, such as the CGATS ID Alliance Control Wedge, or a FOGRAS standard, or other ISO standards, and I can make these selections and run these test targets as well. Again, there's data that's referenced for those types of test targets, so when we print and measure, we're going to get validated information based on a standard and where we are at. Another color check environment I can select is the Print Gamut Verification. In this example, I'll have a series of different hue patch ratings to print and measure. Remember, the Print Gamut Verification is verifying in gamut colors. I'll select the next color check environment, which is our named color evaluation. In this color check environment, I'm going to add from my series of named colors within my library. This is going to reference my Pantone library of colors. And if I scroll to the very bottom of my list, I will see my user-defined colors that are also added in my color table. As I select the Pantone colors, I can also add to my library my user-defined colors from my color table chart to my directory. Now, these are Pantone reference values, so we know what the value is supposed to be in Pantone color. When we print and measure this chart, we're going to see what the delta E is of this named color evaluation target. I'll create this test target and print this information. Once my file is printed, I'll see my job is still waiting here to be measured. I'll double click the file and go into my measurement with my spectrophotometer. So the data report that this is going to generate is going to be this named color evaluation. And as I mentioned earlier, this is referencing Pantone colors or possibly my user-defined colors that I've created in LAB color space. So the information that's generated is going to be based on the measured LAB to what that Pantone's LAB should be, and this is the delta E information I'm going to generate from that. Lastly, I'll go in to create our new color check swatch based on custom image. Within custom image, I'm able to browse for my swatch image. So custom image swatches allows for images that are provided by third-party color validation or verification packages to be easily printed under our specific quick-set conditions. Custom image swatches are not tracked or measured the same as the other color check swatches that we've had here in the past for our environments. Otherwise, they are needed to be separately measured within that third-party package involved. So this would let you have a method to browse for your particular test target images, and then again, through that other third-party software, measure the data and validate the information. Back in the Color Check Reference Guide documentation, on page 43, this section talks about if your color check validation or verification fails, what do you do now? And this is just going to be some guidelines to talk about what you would troubleshoot, what would be on your checklist, and go through your process control scenario to determine where are your issues, why are these specific test targets failing. And in some cases, every shop might be a little bit different, but in some cases it could just be your environment, temperature, humidity, media type, ink set, printer condition, or possibly it's time to perform a calibration and do a recalibration. And that might be something that takes place at the printer level or within the RIP software. So again, this documentation makes reference to some of the checks that we can go through in order to determine why did we have a failure within our verification. And on page 46, this gives some basic baseline troubleshooting flowchart information. And again, every shop will be a little bit different, so it's something that we can establish on our own conditions where we want to go through and do our checks and balances for our process control and develop our very own flowchart. One last point to mention, back in Configure Color Check, we are able to export out our environments that we've created, our different test target types. So we can select these files and export them out as a backup. That concludes our presentation on Color Check. Remember to visit our website and go into your Mionix account to view videos on other topics.